Welcome to Amot Che, where we speak with LGBTQ plus Armenians in Los Angeles and hear their journeys of identity, resilience, culture, and community. I'm Lara Vanian Green. In partnership with the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, this series explores mental health, belonging, and the traditions that shape us. Honest conversations, practical support, and real people finding their way. You are not alone. Let's start the conversation. Hello and welcome to this episode of Amot Che. Today we are discussing one of the topics you're not supposed to discuss in polite conversation over the dinner table, and that is religion, because religion plays such an important role in Armenian culture, particularly Christianity. And a lot of times it is the one place in the community where LGBTQ plus Armenians aren't exactly welcomed with open arms. And I want to talk about that today with two Armenian reverends. We have with us Julie Hoplamazian and Tori Topjian. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on and be interviewed. I truly, truly appreciate it. Thank you for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure, likewise.
So I had asked a liberal Armenian priest if he could come on the show and speak supportively about the LGBTQ Armenian population, but he very politely declined, even though I know that he allows, welcomes, I should say, LGBTQ, what's the word I'm looking for?
Parishioners?
Even though he welcomes LGBTQ people in his congregation, even though the Armenian Church has a very conservative stance on homosexuality and how that fits in with faith. Not everybody agrees. So I wanted to have Reverend Tori and Reverend Julie here to talk about religious Armenian clergy who are accepting and open to LGBTQ worshipers. So if you would tell me a little bit about the church that you belong to and your role in that church.
Tori, do you want to go first?
Either way. So as a young adult, or actually from birth, I was actually raised in the Armenian Orthodox Church. And all through school, whatever, into college, I was very much a part of the church, primarily that my uncle was the former archbishop in the Western Diocese for many, many years. He since has passed over the last couple of years. But as a child, it was sort of a standing joke with my parents that when I was baptized, he kept telling my parents that when this one grows up, he's going to be a priest. And my mother would always look at him and say, "Over her dead body." And that kind of bantering went on actually up through college. And I guess in my college years, I finally identified as being a gay man and a gay Armenian, and was actually attending a non-denominational church at the time. And one of the ministers in that particular congregation knew that I kind of wanted to go into ministry, but because of how I identified, I sort of pulled back. And for many, many years, I kept resisting. And it finally took I guess a honoree dinner or whatever. It was actually in the Presbyterian Church where they were honoring a gentleman by the name of Mel White, who is a very well-known activist in the U.S., as well as the Reverend Troy Perry, who started the Metropolitan Community Church movement, which is the first, I guess, and founding community of faith, accepting, basically was primarily for LGBT individuals who were being rejected from their current houses of faith or worship, whether Christian or Jewish or whatever it was. And the two individuals at the church I was attending had invited me to this dinner honoring them, and it was somewhat, I don't want to say comical. They and it was husband and wife team. They pretty much both took me by the arms and led me up to Reverend Perry and said, "You need to bring this young man into the church and get him, into ministry and all that." And I kind of kept putting it on the back shelf for a while. Finally, I was at lunch with him one day, and he walked me into that senior minister's office and said, "You two need to get to know each other, and Reverend so-and-so, you need to work on bringing him into the church and getting him involved in ministry. And one thing led to another. And probably 8 years later, I actually went to seminary and was ordained. And so I was ordained in the metropolitan community churches, but also have ties with the United Church of Christ as well. And both denominations being open and affirming denominations, and kind of have been in ministry in one form or another, for almost 25, 30 years now.
Wow.
And I still, I still have, it's interesting, I still have good relations with several people in both dioceses. Actually, the one archbishop in New York actually was out here, and I was invited to dinner with several of the other Armenian clergy, whether in the Armenian Church or, like I said, some of the outer communities of faith where there's Armenian ministers. And it was ironically that the conversation of ordaining individuals in the church came up in a roundabout way, and more or less, would the church would the church ever consider ordaining women? And of course, there was a bit of silence, and there really wasn't an answer. But then the follow-up question is, would you would the church ever consider ordaining a gay man? And the response to that was that more than likely that they would ordain a gay man before they ordained a woman.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
But then at the same time, one of the archbishops, and I can't think which country it was, actually did a podcast or something, whatever, was interviewed, whatever, and that subject came up, and his response was that he didn't see any reasons why the Armenian Church should not ordain a gay male. So as we were talking previously, that there are several clergy in the Armenian Orthodox Church that accept and all that. I think a lot of it is that they're cautious because of the beliefs of the faith and the denomination. And, I think kind of deal with it on a case-by-case scenario. I mean, most of them certainly welcome those who are LGBT in their congregations. I mean, I know several who are involved in the church and identify as gay. And in fact, one individual who is a distant cousin actually is a church organist for one of the churches in the greater Los Angeles areas. So there is acceptance. I think it's just a matter of where along the chain the acceptance lies. At least there's been conversation around that. So it's not that it's a dead issue. I think it's just, I don't think that they all know really how to handle it, physically and psychologically and whatever, because I mean, I'm sure that there are within that there are those who, I guess, so-called secretly identify as gay. But of course, again, due to the nature of the polity and the politics in the church, can't come out and physically say so.
Right. Julie, what is your church like, and what is your role in that church?
Well, like Tori, I also grew up in the Armenian Church. My family, my mother's side is Armenian Catholic, and my father's side is Armenian Orthodox. So I always joke that I've got all of my salvation bases covered. And I mean, the truth is, there is like experientially no difference really between Armenian Catholic and Armenian Orthodox churches. It's the same badarak, it's the same everything, except when it comes to the petitions, the Armenian Catholic Church prays for the Pope, and the Armenian Orthodox Church prays for the Catholicos. And in the Armenian Catholic Church, there are nuns. I actually started, my first sense of call to ministry was, I thought I wanted to be a nun. It was all I saw for women, and it seemed appealing in some ways, and I mean, sometimes still it seems appealing, though I don't think I could do it full time. If I could be a part-time nun, it'd be great. But job doesn't exist yet. So I grew up in the Armenian Church, and I think like all of us, just very steeped in an Armenian community. I grew up outside in the Philadelphia community, and in college learned about the Protestant Church, and I hadn't known anything about it before that. And to make a very long story very short, learned that women could be ordained as ministers and priests, and I was like, what? Nobody told me you could do that. And it started me on this path that I clearly ended up on. It took a long time. It was a very circuitous journey for me because I knew that I really wanted to be a priest, but I knew that was never going to happen in the Armenian Church. I think for a small window of time, there was maybe some hope that they would at least ordain women as deacons, but that carrot gets dangled, I think, pretty consistently just to kind of keep people quiet. I also realized that it wasn't just for me the ordination question, but it was just more broadly the church's stance on a variety of social issues that I really struggled with. And I worked for the Armenian diocese for 4 years after seminary. I went to seminary with the express purpose of discerning a call to ministry. Like, is God calling me away from my culture and my tradition or not? And that's a very hard decision to make. I am very Armenian in a lot of ways, and I love being Armenian. I'm proud of being Armenian. And there are a lot of ways in which the community defines what that means for you. And it was a long journey of figuring out how to be Armenian on my own terms. And that took a long time. And then also, like, if I'm not going to be in the Armenian church, well, there's a lot of other churches out there. So it was a long process of discernment as to which one I was feeling called into. And I settled pretty easily on the Episcopal Church. So I am an Episcopal priest. The joke that is often made about the Episcopal Church is that we are diet Catholics. We are all of the religion, none of the guilt. And I think there's some truth to that. You know, we are a sacramental liturgical church. A lot of Roman Catholics who convert to the Episcopal Church very much feel at home, feel like I had one Roman Catholic convert say, I knew all the words when I came to church. And I think in that regard, too, the Anglican Communion and the Orthodox Church have had a long-standing ecumenical partnership and friendship. A lot of Armenians, when they came to this States, their first services were held in Episcopal churches. And that really meant a lot to me to know that there was this long-standing ecumenical friendship between Armenians and Episcopalians. And at the end of the day, I had to admit that to myself that I really do love the tradition. I think it's beautiful and meaningful. Where I really struggled was that I didn't want tradition to be a museum piece that we put on a shelf and worshipped in lieu of worshiping the true and living God. And so in the Episcopal Church, I find a place where tradition, scripture, and reason are held together as three sources of authority. And that meant a lot to me, and that felt like a theology I could get behind. It helps explain why it is a church that is at once very traditional and also very progressive. So the Episcopal Church in the late 70s, moved very much into full inclusion of LGBTQ people and women in the full sacramental life of the church. And that has, it took some longer time to evolve for the LGBTQ community. But yes, I mean, now all of the sacraments of the church are available to all. And that to me is, I think that makes Jesus' heart happy. So I know there are some Armenian priests who would say this makes Jesus weep. So, we differ on that. I'm
no biblical scholar by any stretch of the imagination, but I do believe that Jesus didn't say anything about homosexuality. Am I right on that?
That is correct. There is nothing in the Gospels about homosexuality.
If it's any consolation, that in the 3rd and 4th century we did have nuns, Armenian nuns in the convents, but that was soon banned after the 4th century. But in like 2016, 2017, Vatican II, who was Catholicos, actually changed the situation, lifting the ban of women entering the monastic communities, and that we actually do have some Armenian nuns in northwestern Armenia. So, Julie, if you want to move to Armenia, you can become an Armenian nun, but
I only want to do it part-time.
Summers in Armenia, maybe.
I could be a nun from June through August.
Yeah.
There you go.
So basically, I mean, the highest status that a woman can go is basically becoming a nun, but going one step further. I mean, there is one individual, I think, who became a mother superior, but again, it's still not considered a priest or clergy in the Armenian Church. There's been some movement, but at the same time, it's a slow progress that we may not see in our lifetime, but I mean, some are becoming open-minded in some respects, and maybe when the old guard is down to a minimum, the new guard will start trying to make changes.
From your lips,
yeah,
to God's ears, as they say.
If you have conversations with a lot of our when I say younger clergy, the ones who are under 40, a lot of them who are like in the monasteries now in Armenia and all that, I mean, those who have visited the U.S. and other outlying, you know, countries or whatever, I mean, their take is very open in the sense of they, in their minds, don't see any difference either, in the sense of, a Christian is a Christian, and we're all created in God's image. At the same time, um, and then those who are American born that went into the priesthood, I would say a good majority of them, like 80 to 90% of them, again, like the one individual that you chatted with, are very open minded again. But again, it's just tend to have to take caution because of how the Armenian Church is still governed in in the world.
I was going to say that I was surprised to hear just last week that the Catholic Church put out a statement acknowledging the pain that has been caused to their followers by things like conversion therapy, and that was an interesting statement that I wasn't expecting anything like that from the church. So I do feel like in some ways, obviously very slow progress, but there is some progress being made. What did you think of that message when you heard it?
I did not know about that. I knew that there had been a question of Pope Leo recently in some sort of press conference where he was asked about LGBTQ inclusion in the Catholic Church, and he sort of bumbled an answer that was not entirely. I mean, he was apparently like really tired from a long trip, and yeah, I have a lot of respect for Pope Leo. I really, in a lot of ways, I'm very happy with how he is continuing the work of Pope Francis, and he emphasized Pope Francis's, tutti, 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 like for all, everyone is welcome. And the Catholic Church has done a lot of work. I shouldn't say a lot. It's done some work of inclusion of LGBTQ people. Father James Martin is a big voice in that. But at the end of the day, so yeah, I'm glad to know they have acknowledged the pain that their stance has caused, particularly in the harm that it has done to people. But at the end of the day, I still feel confused by a church that says it really wants to welcome LGBTQ people, but still holds to theology that calls homosexuality a sin.
Thank you. Absolutely. And I don't think you're alone in being confused. It is
No.
very confusing. I don't know if the next question that I was going to ask is what kind of messages you received about being queer from religious spaces growing up. But it is a very mixed message to say that the Bible, however you define that, condemns homosexuality. But here are all these churches that are very accepting of it. How is that reconciled?
The Bible doesn't condemn homosexuality. That's the misnomer. I mean, I think people interpret scriptures the way they want to interpret it because there's nothing that clearly states that that is a sin or not accepted. And I think a lot of it filtered through the evangelical sector of Christianity, where people decided that, you know, I think it was humans who basically interpreted scripture the way they want to interpret scripture. And then, one led to the other, this or that, whatever. So everybody sort of jumped on the bandwagon. If you really dig, you really have to dig deep to reinterpret that homosexuality is a sin or a crime through scripture. Because if you really dissect it, because I tell people that you'll pick one verse out of 20 verses, and the one verse that you pick, you're interpreting that it's a sin. But if you read the whole paragraph or the whole section of verses, it gives a whole different interpretation. So, and throughout the Bible, you hear that we've all been created in God's image. So at the same time, you're going to say that God didn't create people who identify as LGBT. So we weren't created in God's image. So when you start bringing those factors into the mix, it becomes a whole different ball game with people. And a lot of times there's no defense, and there's no backup to their stance, and it kind of just quietly filters away type of thing. But I mean, when I decided to go into ministry, I had somewhat questioning in the back of my head too. At the same time, here I identify as a gay individual, and am I going to be accepted? I mean, there was lots of lots of discernment around that. At that point, my mom had already passed, but before I made my final decision, I sat down with my dad and I said, this is kind of the career change, a career path I want to do. Do you have issues with it? I think I wanted to get the acknowledgement from my parent, because we were raised Armenian Orthodox from the get go. I think I knew what the answer was going to be but just to hear that confirmation from him saying um, that he had no issues with it whatsoever, and that if my mom was still living, that they have always supported whatever decisions that we have made in life and our careers, and totally supported me all through seminary and my ordination. I mean, I've never seen a parent so proud to see their son graduate seminary, knowing that I was a gay man, and then at my ordination at the same thing. He was like, ear to ear with smiles and just proud of the accomplishments that I have taken in my life. So, and when I was living in Los Angeles, whenever he would come down for a visit, he would always go to church with me, and congregation, was always thrilled, when any of our parents would come to church or whatever, and he was treated like royalty, which I kind of laugh. I'm like, I said I don't get that treatment, but my parents get it. But back in the day, not that I'm dating myself, but it wasn't as readily acceptable as it is now.
I do want to acknowledge that you were very fortunate with the set of parents that you found yourself with. And I don't want to minimize the pain of a lot of LGBTQ Armenian folks whose parents and whose church use religion as a way to condemn the
Oh,
identities of their children. And I
no
really
doubt.
want to talk about that. And I want to talk about where LGBTQ Armenians of faith can find a home where they can belong. Maybe if there's what the baby steps are for the Armenian Church to help to reduce the stigma and the rejection of the queer parishioners.
I don't know what Julie's view on it is, but I mean, my view is that, I know a lot of young Armenians who struggle with that. And I know some that have been ousted from so-called society, from Armenian society, because of how they identify. When I was in California, Glendale, the little Armenia of the world, I can't tell you when I was teaching at Glendale College, and I did some help in teaching at Glendale High with one of my colleagues. Um, the countless of the Armenian kids, learning that I was Armenian, and then later on in one form of those learned that I was a gay man. I mean, a lot of them was like, well, what happened with your family? And I said, like you said, I was very fortunate. I mean, it took my parents some time to adjust back when I told them. I think it's what every parent, regardless if you're Armenian or not, goes through when your child makes the announcement that they're gay or lesbian or however they identify. That it's like, what did they do wrong in raising the child? And they did absolutely nothing wrong. And then the Armenian culture, which I sort of chuckle, whatever, but it's like, well, what are the neighbors going to think? What are the other Armenians going to think when they find out that we have a gay child? And surprisingly enough, there were some that get standoffish or rejected or whatever. But for the most part, at least in the United States, and I don't know how it is so much on the East Coast, but I mean, like in California, I mean, um, it was pretty accepted for the most part. I mean, and I would say in the sense of accepted for those who basically were American born and raised. And my message to those young adults are that you're accepted regardless of how you identify and who you are. And if you're wanting to become a part of a community of faith, now there are several denominations that are very open and affirming. I mean, the Episcopal Church, both the United Church of Christ and Metropolitan Community Churches, now the Methodist Church, after long battles with, ordaining LGBT folks, I mean, that's finally come to light.
The ELCA.
The ESA, which is the Lutheran part of one sector of the Lutheran Church, the Presbyterian Church. So most of all the mainline denominations
But as I say, the PCUSA, not the PCA.
Yeah,
We have to
yeah,
be
yeah,
careful.
yeah.
Yeah.
So again, like the Lutheran Church, it's still sectored off, but like the PCUSA and the ECLA, which is the Lutheran sector, I mean, it's kind of that a lot of these folks are now accepting, and it's interesting because a lot of young Armenians who, especially, are not from, I guess, both parents being Armenian, where one may be Odar and whoever. So a lot of times those kids, even though they have their Armenian heritage and all that, were raised in other denominations and not the Armenian Church. And a lot of those kids who probably are now in their 20s and 30s and maybe discovering Christianity are starting to go back to their original houses of faith and worship because they're now accepted.
I think there's also, I mean, Lana, you asked a really good question about what are the steps for queer Armenians to take if they want to be part of a religious community or a religious institution. And I mean, Tori, it's a good reminder that like not all Armenians grow up in the Armenian Church. And I think that is part of the conundrum that a lot of LGBTQ Armenians that I know find themselves in, where it's not just what church can I go to that will accept me? It's like, where can I go and be an Armenian, where I can also be queer, and where both of those identities can coexist. And I think the challenge for a lot of folks is that you often feel like you have to choose one or the other. That if I want to really be part of the Armenian Church, it is really difficult to be fully LGBTQ. And if I want to be in a church that fully embraces LGBTQ people, the Armenian part is often missing. And I think I just want to name that.
Thank
And I
you.
think that's like one of like, I mean, I'm a straight person, but I very much believe that all people are created in the image of God, and that, I mean, the Armenian Church's stance on like, is homosexuality a sin, was one of the main reasons I just didn't feel like I could stay. Just because the queer people of faith that I know are so faithful and reflect the love of Christ so beautifully that there is no possible way one could say they don't belong in the church. So where my heart grieves is that I don't know that there really exists a place where you can be really like Armenian and really queer altogether. And even like there are Armenian Protestant churches, but they are also pretty conservative. There aren't like mainline.
That's a hit and miss scenario.
Yeah. It's not uniform, right? So I don't know, maybe we need to start something here. I don't know. But like I have cousins who are queer, and they have said, like, I just, if you like led a church, I would come, I mean, theoretically they live in other parts of the country, but the idea that it would be so great if if the service were, if I could say the Heidmir, and just like the things that are so familiar and comforting and so deeply part of my formative childhood church experience that also express my culture as well as my faith. And if there were a way to do the rituals and the liturgy and I know for myself, I mean, even though I wasn't looking for a place to, I mean, as a straight person, I wasn't worried about that form of belonging. As a woman and a woman feeling called to ministry, I felt very rejected by the Armenian Church. And so it took a long time for the Protestant church to not feel like a consolation prize. And I now I don't feel that way anymore. I was about to say I love the Episcopal Church. The more I am in it, the more I see its flaws. That's a whole other podcast. But for the purpose of this conversation, I think there still is a sort of gap in what's available to queer Armenians. So like one of your options is find a church like Tori's or mine that is open and affirming and welcomes LGBTQ people. Maybe bring some Armenian friends with you so you have some sort of fellowship with other Armenians, but know that it's likely going to be an American, Odar sort of experience. And even within, like, Tori and I are totally talking in, like, insider language, like, all these acronyms, like, ELCA, PCUSA. People are like, what does that mean? These are all, you could Google it all. But there are a number of Protestant churches of various denominations that express their faith and their worship very differently. So, your experience in an Episcopal church would be probably very different from a metropolitan church.
I wish there could be an online space, and maybe it doesn't have to be every week, but maybe for the big
Well,
holidays.
a mutual colleague of Julie and mine keeps telling me that I should move back to Glendale and open a gay Armenian church.
You could.
I mean, there is a need for that kind of space.
But I told her, I said, only if she came with me. But
With Susan?
yeah. But I think the other, I guess, somewhat formula in those who identify in the community. I mean, a lot of them have found their community of faith, believe it or not, by attending gay pride festivals. Because a lot of now the mainline denominations and churches or whatever, I mean, in the local areas, they all will we'll get a booth or whatever. And here in Milwaukee, it's quite unique because I think we have one of the largest, I guess, type festivals in the country, but the grounds are sort of sectioned off in this. I mean, it's strategically sectioned off in very good ways. I mean, there's one area that they call health and wellness, which is basically all the medical institutions and all the, I guess, those types of careers, but they also include the religious community as well. And then within that, I guess, area, whatever, they're sort of like open tented. So there's usually like 8 or 9 booths back to back, all together. So you've got like eight different denominations and churches all kind of clumped together. So it's kind of like if you're going shopping for a church, you can just like walk around the tent. But a lot of those individuals who are seeking Christianity or seeking a church, I mean, even our Jewish sisters and brothers, those communities of faith are there, all open and affirming, and a lot of times the booths are manned by not the staff, whatever. It's manned by the congregants, and those who either identify or as gay or identify as straight. But there's also one booth where all the ecumenical clergy have come together, um, which they called the blessing booth, and it's where you can come and receive a blessing for whatever you may need a blessing for. And it's for our Muslim, our Christian, I mean, so we have all the different clergy who will take turns manning that particular booth and provide blessings. And the first year that they did it, everybody was a little uncertain because when people think of pride festivals and all that, it's like, let's go have fun and let's basically be wild. But it's amazing to see how many people pass through that particular section seeking or trying to find maybe a church home because they couldn't go to where they were raised. I mean, a lot of the churches, usually in the summer months, you'll gain a big plethora of visitors because they're checking out all the different churches to see where they might fit in. But it is difficult. Like Julie was saying, if an Armenian individual decides that they want to come to church, I mean, bring a friend. And I mean, the friend doesn't even have to be Armenian. I mean, doesn't have to be LGBT. I mean, I've had a few where I've had a couples join the church, and one was Armenian and one was not. And the two couples actually didn't know each other, but then became friends. And through that, their other friends started coming and all that. So, they kind of built some camaraderie, whatever, and also knowing that it was okay to be Armenian, but also be in a non-Armenian church.
I want to ask a question that you are completely free to not answer if you don't want to answer it, but what do you think it says about the longevity of the Armenian Church that they are so resistant to change? And in this case, I think a lot of, and maybe it's a cynical point of view, but I think the reason that a lot of religions start to embrace more open-minded policies, for lack of a better word, is that they want to maintain their relevancy to their congregants, right? That you want to speak to the people who are coming to get that spiritual nourishment. And as a result, as the society changes and evolves, they've had to broaden whatever they're acceptable, the norm in a particular religion. What does it say about the Armenian Church that they're so rigid in this, especially when we are such a small minority of people?
Well, one of the biggest problems I think it's somewhat universal in respects, is that in the Armenian Church, pretty much, I think, depending on which Armenian church you go to, but 85% of the Badarak, or the service, is in Armenian. And a lot of the so-called current generations, like the teens and the 20s and 30s and even 40s, a lot of them don't speak or understand Armenian. Um,
Right.
as a child, so I'm dyslexic, and which sometimes is a good thing and sometimes is a bad thing. But all through childhood and growing up and all that, I mean, all my grandparents did was speak to us in Armenian. So I mean, so I did know some Armenian growing up, but after they passed on or this or that, and then my one grandmother only spoke English with us because she wanted to get her English refined. But that generation as children only spoke to us in Armenian, and we had to answer. We couldn't answer them in English. We had to speak Armenian to them. But as those generations started to die off, and then when I went to college, I went to a college where there really wasn't an Armenian community. I lost a lot of that, and trying to relearn the Armenian and being dyslexic has been a major challenge. I understand it to a point, but my speaking ability is really bad as an adult, and I'm sorry that I didn't keep up with it. But a lot of these younger generations who don't, unless you've migrated from Armenia. The Glendale community is 99% Armenian, um, transplant from Armenia. They speak and understand Armenian. Then you get the other aspect of it, where you get the American-born Armenians who maybe grew up in a split household where one parent was Armenian and one wasn't, that they never learned Armenian. They now become the outcast in the Armenian church.
The Armenian that's spoken in the Armenian church is not conversational, everyday Armenian.
Well, the service, but for the service, but the general conversation is regular Armenian.
Mhm.
Like fellowship and all that. But and it's interesting because the Armenian church, I think, finally has recognized that to a point in some areas. It's like we're losing the younger generation, but it's because a lot of them don't understand the language. And some of the churches will do it in Armenian and English, which that's sort of how I was raised on the East Coast. But I think a lot of it is that there needs to be more conversations with the higher ups. I know that when I was in Los Angeles, I was actually, I think I was taken as the token Armenian gay from MCC with our founder. I'm going back maybe 10, 15 years. But he actually was able to get a meeting with the Archbishop to discuss the controversy of LGBT Armenians or LGBT folks being accepted in the Armenian Church. I was a little timid about wanting to go because I didn't know what to expect, number one. Number two, the Archbishop at that time was my uncle, who acknowledged me but didn't acknowledge me, so to speak. So I kind of was the outcast in his eyes, but yet he has accepted my gay cousin, who is an organist in one of the churches. So being at the clergy level, I basically was non-existent. And this man baptized me from birth and had basically raised me in the church, but didn't even have the courtesy of coming to my ordination, and told my father that he was busy and he wasn't able to come. And that didn't sit right with my dad. But at the same time, but the conversation was, why are the Armenian LGBT folks not accepted in the church? And there never was a definitive answer, which I was somewhat expecting, but at the same time, it sort of got waylaid. And it was kind of like that. It was sort of like it was okay, but it was unspoken, and basically kind of like don't ask, don't tell. I mean, if you identify as a gay Armenian, whatever, it's okay to be a part of the church and all that, but just don't expose it, so to speak. So basically, come and worship, and on your way. But there's also, I mean, I also know from growing up too within the church, and honestly, accidentally stumbled across. I mean, I don't even know how to describe it, but I know a couple folks who were very prominent in some of the Armenian churches in the Los Angeles area. And when I was involved, I was also involved in the youth organization for many, many years, to the point that I was the council president for the West Coast Youth Organization. So you would visit churches, and I would say accidentally or not intentionally, whatever, just came across a few individuals who were gay, but again, it was one of those don't ask, don't tell type of things. I mean, certain people I'm sure in the congregation knew, but again, it wasn't like, well, this individual is gay, and it was basically unspoken, but was accepted. And some of those people were very high on the totem pole in some of these congregations. But when I learned that some of them were so-called closeted gay, as the Gay Society puts it, it was interesting because I was treated a little bit differently later in life when they found out that I was a gay minister, and ran into them years later, and someone was apologized that they weren't open with me. I pretty much, I think, had identified as a gay man since my 20s, since college. So I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. At the same time, in some respects, the Armenian Church is open to conversation, but to what extent, I couldn't tell you. I know that the Archbishop on the East Coast, I don't know if it's the current one or the one before him, seems to have had the attitude that is open to those types of conversations. But again, to what extent they will go,
Yeah,
I
Lada,
really
you
can't tell
asked
you.
you asked about relevance and is the church going to become irrelevant? And I think the church would also say it is not the church's job to bend to culture. It is, and it is the church's role to bear witness to the gospel, sort of sometimes over and against the culture that we're in. And so I think there can be some tension there when we're asking the church to change because the culture around us is changing, and the church almost has a knee-jerk reaction against that. It tends to say, we are the holders of truth here. Culture is subject to the whims and the subjectivity of the times and people's opinions, but the church is eternal. God has given it to us to preserve and to protect. And you're all nodding along like, yes, we've heard this before, right? And I think there is something important to that I don't want a church that just bends to every whim and I don't want a church that's going to too quickly embrace AI. I'm really nervous about what AI is going to do for our world. This is not a conversation about that, but there are,
Yeah.
the things that face our society today could never have been imagined even 100 years ago, let alone 2,000 years ago, right? And so I think that is something that we have to keep in mind when we think about what is the responsibility of the church in consistently reevaluating and reinterpreting itself in light of what we know now that we may not have known previously. And for me, that is why I am an Episcopalian, because there is always that checks and balances of, tradition has taught us this, scripture has taught us this, and maybe science has taught us this, or, the evolution of culture has shown us this, and holding all of that together is, to me, really important. So your question is a good one. And it's a difficult one to answer. Is the church going to lose its relevance if it continues to hold this very conservative stance about homosexuality? I think to some degree, yes. And certainly to anyone who wants a church who will totally embrace them, they're going to be completely irrelevant, right? And to the people who know and love them. There are, even as a woman, people who love me, their frustration with the church went up a notch. They may not have stopped going, but they're just like, oh, you could have, the church could have had you. You could have, and Tori, the same is true for you. The church could have had you. We could have served the Armenian Church if they were open to queer people and women. But
Can I ask why they're not open to women? I know it's an ignorant question, but I really don't understand where it comes from.
It goes
Sorry if I
back.
opened a can of worms.
It goes back to the third and fourth century, where when we had Armenian nuns at that same time, and there was even a mother superior back in the day. Pretty much, if you're looking at equation, that I guess a level of mother superior is almost basically equivalent to being a Catholic priest level, because in the monasteries, or in the I don't know if it's called a nunnery or whatever, the convents, the Reverend Mother was the one who led worship because it was all women, it was all nuns. I think that when they put that Catholicos put a ban on it back in the 4th and 5th century, everything just kind of went by the wayside. And I think it wasn't up until recently where, you know, these Armenian nuns basically got the notion of like, hey, we're just as important as the priest, and something needs to be done. And I think that's when Kadakin decided that okay, it's okay to have the Armenian nuns back in the convents and the monasteries and all of that, and basically named one of them a reverend mother or mother superior. So
It's like
there,
separate but equal, though. They're
yeah,
still not ordained
yeah,
as priests.
yeah,
And I think that there is so much culture tied up in that.
yeah,
And you can't untangle like
yeah.
Armenian patriarchal misogynistic culture from what they think the theology is.
I think like what I was gonna get at is that, like Julie was saying, I mean, there's still not that equality across the board, but at the same time, it's gonna take a long effort. But at the same time, I think that the more individuals like us or those who are in the non-Armenian churches band together and start pushing some of that culture into the Armenian church in the sense of saying, there needs to be more dialogue. I mean, look at I mean, I probably could count over 25 individuals that I know that are ministers, men and women in non-Armenian churches. I mean, it's like kind of like I think Susan at one time I had a conversation with one of our colleagues that it's like we sort of need to band together and kind of create a force where we start this dialogue with the Armenian church and saying, hey, it's okay that all the other denominations are accepting to women and LGBT folks, because I mean, it's not just gay men who are in the churches. I mean, we have lesbians, we have transgender ministers. I mean, it's a matter of going back to the original of that we're all created in the image of God's eye. That maybe they need to start taking a relook at what society is going to be like 10 years from now or 20 years from now, and maybe slowly taking the shift and at least accepting the culture into the church. I mean, we can't push them all at once, because if Armenians don't move that fast. I mean, if we get to the point of accepting the culture, of accepting those who identify within your congregations, and that they don't have to hide it, then I think little by little the conversations will progress into, okay, well, like I had said earlier, that more than likely they'd ordain a gay man versus a woman, but who knows how far down the line that is. I mean, I think a lot of it is the dialogue and the communications that still need to happen. But again, it's who are those people that are going to lead it, and bring the forces together. And it's not that, and I think Julie, you would agree, it's not that we don't want to come together and do it. It's just that, a lot of it is that where do we begin, and where, and what direction do we take? I mean, we're all over the place. I mean, we're not all centralized in one area. So I mean, we're throughout the United States, but it's a matter of bringing people together. You know, I mean,
I
I
mean,
know, I know that in some of the denominations, that I think in MCC and UCC, that we've been trying for years to them to at least acknowledge the Armenian genocide, and there's been conversations one after the other, but it seems to somehow get to a point and then nothing happens. It's not by fault of the denominations. It's just that you can only go so far. You need that extra support from the other areas to make things happen. So, you can rally as much as you want, but at the same time, you need to have the buy-in from the leadership of the churches to acknowledge that, well, the Armenians were the first to identify as Christians, number one, and a lot of these other denominations would not be in existence as Christian denominations if it wasn't for the Armenian Church.
yeah. You bring up such a great question, Tori. I mean, I'm trying to imagine like people like you and me in a room with like the Surpazan from the diocese, right? And to like, where does that conversation even start? And I wonder what it would be like for the Armenian Church to maybe one of the ways the Armenian Church could start on this path is to take a cue from the Roman Catholic Church. Even though a little while ago I said I find that position very confusing, which I do, there is still, I mean, the thing is, like, the Catholic Church means so much to so many people. Like, if you grow up and Armenians feel the same way, like, this church is so much a part of who we are, and it means so much to people. And so for the church to say, almost like, okay, we'll get to the, like, is homosexuality a sin question later. But for right now, and this is a terrible approach, but, like, this is kind of what the Catholic Church is doing. And they're like, we'll just put that aside for now, but we want you to feel at home here because we know you love this church and we want you to feel welcome and loved and embraced by this church. Theology aside, that's a whole other podcast. But I wonder if the Armenian Church could take some sort of a cue from that, where at least, because in the Roman Catholic Church, that is coming from the top down. That is the Pope saying, we need to welcome all. And I wonder if that might be a place to start where the Armenian Church could say, you know what, we've got a lot of issues to work out here, but welcome is the most important thing. You need to know that if you are gay, you can come to church and you are not going to be treated like a pile of cow dung. And, like, even there, like, there are so many cultural attitudes that would need to shift, and that could be shifted if, like, the higher ups would start that conversation. I think there could be shifts if you had a bishop and all of his priests saying, stop being so bigoted toward your gay child. They are Armenian and they are welcome here. Like, that would go, I think that would start a conversation and it would go far. Tori, you're looking at you want to say something.
No. I'm in total agreement. I think what's so funny is that it's somewhat there, but it's at the wrong level.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the level where it's the local parish priest or the harships or the derhais. We have that hierarchy in the Armenian Church of married and non-married priest, but it's that level that is the open-minded and open to the conversations. Yeah. I mean, I sort of chuckle a little bit, and I'm going back 15 years maybe. When I was in seminary, I can't remember which class it was, but it was a cultural class in the sense of, and there was like 40 people in the class, and the first day the professor had everybody go around the room and introduce themselves and what church they grew up in and what church they're currently in now. To my surprise, I had 2 Armenian priests in that class who were basically, I don't know if they were doing it for CE or whatever. I'm not sure how the Armenian Church require. I mean, I know in ours we have to do so many continuing educational things, whatever. But one of those individuals happened to be in my small group, and the conversation of acceptance in our churches kind of came to the table, and I point blank asked this individual. I said, "So how do you feel as an individual, as an Armenian priest, accepting any gender or any individual in your congregation?" And I wasn't sure what the answer was going to be, but very, very quickly said, I accept everybody. I mean, as most of the I guess that level of clergy have taken, and I know that in the Western diocese, and he goes, which I about dropped to the floor when he said this. He goes, we all had to go through basically a LGBT 101 course as clergy.
Where?
Within the Western diocese, all the Armenian clergy. Now, I'm going back.
What were they teaching?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's of acceptance or just LGBT awareness or whatever that you may have a congregation that is LGBT. I wanted to, but I didn't really get in depth with it. But I found it's like, well, they had to basically have some type of awareness of the LGBT community. And basically, I guess, what do you do if you have a congregant who identifies as gay or lesbian? And I mean, as a lot of us have found from mutual friends and colleagues, whatever, I mean, most of that level of clergy accept them for who they are. I mean, again, to what level of being out they can be in that congregation, I couldn't tell you, but I found it very, very interesting that at least there's conversation at that level versus higher ups who basically will shut the door to it. But at the same time, I mean, I would love to see all of the non-Armenian church clergy come together and rally and do something in the sense of maybe trying to reopen the conversation at the higher levels. Someone on the bucket list, but I'm not sure where on the bucket list at this point. But but your question, Laura, in the sense of where back to where does somebody go or seek out? I mean, like Julie was saying, I mean, it starts with connecting with individuals like her and I, who are ministers in churches that are open and affirming, and yeah.
I mean, I did the wedding. I've done a couple of weddings of queer Armenians, and a lot of that came out of like Armenians who wanted truly like an Armenian wedding, right? And just hearing, it wasn't just a church wedding that they wanted. It wasn't just the wedding that they wanted the church for. They wanted the church for like part of their everyday life and community. And that need is there. It really is. And it really breaks my heart that, because at the end of the day, like, sure, you can, if you're closeted, if you're, don't ask, don't tell, you can walk into an Armenian church and, be gay. But if you want to be married, if you are adopting your child and want to have your child baptized, when we talk about the sacramental life of the church, there is a long way to go before the Armenian Church can really have open and honest conversation about this, and also deeply theological and hermeneutical conversations. I think that is the part where culture can get in the way for the Armenian Church. That what I mean by those terms is like hermeneutics is the way you interpret the Bible, the methods by which you interpret the Bible. So your hermeneutics and your exegesis. The exegesis is the practice, and the hermeneutics is the method you use. Like the exegetical hermeneutical approach is, I would say, much more developed in the Protestant church than it is in the Armenian church, particularly in terms of how we have understood the passages of scripture that some use to condemn homosexuality. It doesn't take a genius to look at Leviticus and understand that this is all there's just all cultural context here, and also like the holiness codes of Leviticus. It does say like it is an abomination for a man to lie with another man. It also says it's an abomination to eat shellfish. It also says it's an abomination to eat leftovers. So like
mixed fabrics or something, right?
Yeah. I mean, all that stuff, right? And so the Armenian Church needs to be able to talk about that honestly, and to be able to say, we pick and choose. We all pick and choose what of scripture we hold as authoritative and why, and if the why is lowercase t tradition, if the why is lowercase c culture, if it's just how we've always done it and how we've always understood it, and that is so deeply ingrained in us that we can't imagine other possibilities, we need to talk about that.
Well, that goes back to what I was saying earlier, that people will take one verse in the middle of an entire scripture of like the abominations, whatever, and they'll take that one 4-word sentence out and say, okay, well, homosexuality is a sin. Well, like Julie was just saying, well, what about the shellfish? What about this?
Yeah.
So did you read before that line, and did you read after that line? So it's like if you're condemning that, then you fall somewhere in between verse 1 and verse 20, and you're picking out verse 10 type of thing.
Right. Yeah, you're condemning gay people over your leftover shrimp cocktail.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
Double sin. Is there such a thing?
Wearing your polyester polyblend shirt.
I was very, I guess, honored that when I was still living in Los Angeles, that I had 2 Armenian gay gentlemen want to get married. Through a mutual friend, got us together for drinks or dinner one evening because they wanted someone to marry them. And when I heard the original story that they had gone to their priest and asked, I mean, you thought World War III was about to start after, but there was no way in hell that he would do it. And they asked, well, what if we what if we brought in our own minister? No, we can't do that. It's got to be, if you're going to do it in the Armenian church, it's got to be an Armenian minister. So when I'm hearing all this, but they wanted aspects of the Armenian wedding ceremony incorporated into their ceremony. So when we sat down, they were telling me all this, and I said, I don't see any reason why that can't be incorporated. I mean, you don't necessarily, as much as culture and you want to, be married in the Armenian church, there's nothing saying that you have to be married in that church. I mean, we could do the same exact type of ceremony and do it elsewhere, which we did. And it was really interesting because part of the family was totally against the marriage, and then the other part of the family was totally supportive. And it wasn't until the day of the wedding that I think everybody realized that we're all one family, and I think everybody kind of came to their senses, and everything turned out well. Interesting enough, a few years later, they twin children, and they wanted the girls baptized. Well, like Julie was saying, the Armenian Church refused, and I said, bring them to me, and again, there was some resistance from the family, but it was funny because since their wedding, both sides of the family sort of made that cultural shift of acceptance. I mean, it was really interesting because they both families had acknowledged that they had a gay child, but when it came to the point of marriage, that was a whole different ballgame. But I think, again, over time, they realized that it really was no different than anything else. And then when the girls were baptized, that was a whole nother episode. But when it got down to the physical, these children are being baptized in the eyes of God, that the light bulb went on and saying, hey, it's no different than if they were baptized in the Armenian church. So every family or culture kind of has a different mindset of how their LGBT Armenian children should live, and if they meet somebody, whatever. I mean, I've also married mixed faith, Armenian and Jewish, actually. I mean, and I also had a lovely pair of ladies that wanted to get married as well. I think we got all the way through it, and I think it ended up that Julie, you ended up doing the wedding for them for some reason. I don't know what the reason was, but they lost contact with me, and then the next thing I heard when I contacted a mutual friend saying, "Oh, they contacted some minister in New York," and I'm like,
That was such a gorgeous wedding.
yeah.
I'm still in touch with them and have such deep love for them. They were amazing.
I was looking forward to doing their wedding because we had several conversations, and the next thing I knew, it was like, I think I ended up hearing that they were wanting a woman to marry them, which was fine with me. But
yeah, I get that.
yeah, so it's the Armenian culture. It's really interesting. I mean, like the LGBT Armenian culture. I mean, you have two lovely women that want to get married, and they wanted a tradition. They wanted, I'm not sure what the outcome was, but they wanted, again, parts of their Armenian culture incorporated into their ceremony. And
yeah, they wanted it like all in Armenian. And so I did. And actually, one of the gifts of colonialism is that there was an Episcopal bishop who traveled to the Ottoman Empire in the 1840s to try to convert all these already Christian people.
Yeah.
I laugh. I shouldn't laugh. It's so ridiculous. But
yeah,
the gift of that is that the Episcopal prayer book is translated very poorly into Armenian. And there is a printed copy in the Columbia University Library. So I have a connect, my seminarian who has access to that library, went in with her phone and took pictures of because you can't take the book out of the library because it's so old and falling apart. Anyway, long story short, I was able to do because I am an Episcopal priest, so I was going to do an authorized liturgy from my tradition. But I incorporated the crowning ceremony. I incorporated things from the Armenian wedding. But I was like, I'm going to, we talked through it. It was a bit of a hybrid Armenian Episcopal, but it was mostly all in Armenian. And what I would say, Tori, what was so beautiful about that wedding was one of their parents was very like they weren't even sure the parents were going to show up that
Yeah.
day.
I remember from the start with them. And I think part of the reason was that I didn't speak Armenian, which was, I think, the other reason why they came to you, which I'm thrilled that they ended up going to, because they weren't even sure that it was going to happen back when we had first the conversation. But
Yeah.
but
Yeah. But it
so
was like, what ended up happening was there was so much love and joy in that room that by the end of the wedding, like both sets of parents were like embracing their children. It
yeah.
was like, I don't want to be too Pollyanna about it, but like I have followed up with these women because I'm like, am I imagining this or was this like a miracle? And they were like, no, it was a miracle. And so sometimes, we make progress.
And that's how it was with the two gentlemen that I had done their ceremony for. There was kind of like this, two bulls bucking head type of thing. And by the end of the evening, everybody was one family and, all embracing both sides of the families. There are small miracles that happen in our community, believe it or not. There's still a long way to go. And, it's conversations like this that I think help move things a little bit further as we go down the line. I'm I'm a firm believer, even in my own congregations, that nothing happens without communication, and if you don't have communication amongst one another, nothing's going to happen.
Can I ask you a little bit of a different, not a different topic, but a little bit of a different tack? Um, are you aware of any faith-based mental health resources for queer kids of any kind, not just Armenian, but is there anything like that in terms of resources?
Sadly, as clergy, we're not professionally trained in a lot of those areas, so a lot of these mental health professionals really save the day and really come to the forefront. And then even within our own congregations, I had a mental health individual as a parishioner for years until they moved. So a lot of times within congregations, there's somebody in that profession that are good resources as well.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, I definitely.
Tori's right. There aren't a lot of like faith-based mental health resources like systemically. But one thing that comes to mind is there are a lot of spiritual directors
Yeah.
who can be great resources. Spiritual direction is not therapy, but a good spiritual director can either work in tandem with your therapist or I mean, it's a good sort of adjunct thing to therapy that I mean, if you get really lucky, you find a spiritual director who is also a therapist, but those are unicorns. They're hard to find. But spiritual director, I mean, like, so that's like a very individual thing. That's not like an organization you could call it that and tends to be sort of networking and,
Yeah.
who do you know who could do this? But that's a way to, if you want a faith perspective with some guidance and counseling, that's another option.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean,
Thank you.
even some of the like denomination offices. I mean, I don't know on the Episcopal level, but but I'm sure like if you like you contacted the national offices for any of the denominations, I'm sure that they would have those types of resources because I'm sure they tackle that question a lot throughout time, whatever. I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, either that or they could locally connect you with one of the churches and sometimes through the churches a lot of the ministers have connections with mental health folks because again we have some training in that area but
Yeah.
it's not a focused area in seminary, at least it wasn't when I went to seminary, and that you develop those resources and those contacts in the community with those who are in that profession and are more than happy to guide you and assist you with getting those individuals to the right.
Or you could do what one of my parishioners did and say, why pay for a therapist when I could come to you for free?
Absolutely. That and a best friend and an Armenian cup of coffee and some fortune telling, I think has worked miracles, if you allow me to use that term loosely in the past. But to wrap things up on a lighthearted note, because I know that we've covered some heady topics here, the question that I'm going to put forth to you is, what is your favorite Armenian dish and who makes it the best?
Auntie.
Who makes it the best? Your mom, a restaurant, your grandma?
My mom does not really cook.
Neither did mine.
So it's funny. My grandmother would used wonton wrappers because She wanted a shortcut, and then she would fry her manti. So I grew up with manti that tasted really different from like how it was made in the Armenian food store. But to be honest, the kind that comes from the Armenian food store is my favorite. When I came to Glendale to do that wedding, I was absolutely blown away by the fact that there is not one, not two, but 3 manti restaurants. I thought I had died and gone to heaven. And I'm like normally vegetarian. I don't really eat a lot of meat, but I gorged myself on manti and like other Armenian food that weekend.
The
I got very
Manti
sick.
factory has a mushroom Manti that they make. Like it's a
I
vegan
hate
Manti.
mushrooms.
Me too.
I hate mushrooms. Why do they put mushroom? Why do they assume all vegetarians like mushrooms? It's like in everything. Anyway,
I don't know, but yeah, no, fair.
Well,
but
you got to remember, Glendale is the U.S. Armenia of the world. So I mean,
oh, I know that, but like it was still a culture shock, but like there's more than one. But I went to the Monty factory anyway. I gorged myself on Monty, and I got so sick, but it was totally worth it. It was the best weekend of eating I think I've ever had.
I love it.
I have 2. I miss the West Coast lamb engine. I mean, I know I can get it on the East Coast as well, but there was I don't even think they might still be in business, but in sort of East LA kind of whatever. It was a place called Portamians, and they made the best lamb engine in Southern California. And he has since passed away, and I knew him. He was one of my friends. I would drive from Los Feliz clear across town just to get lamb engine from him because it was like the best going. Other than when my grandmother was alive, it was good. But the other is I mean, I grew up with it being called porov kufta, which is the stuffed kufta, like the kufta. So the inside is like a ground lamb mixture, and the outside is basically the chi kufta or the khema, and they're either it's kind of I mean I guess Armenian kibbeh, but they're not fried. They're boiled or sometimes just in beef broth. Some Armenians do it like in a tomato broth type of thing. But my grandmother was the queen of that. I mean, we've all learned how to make it, but they still aren't like, we were always told the key to that is that the outer shell has to be almost paper thin. And to do that is like an art. My one cousin has mastered it, but because if you get the outer too thick, then you lose the essence of what's inside.
Lotto, what's your favorite?
I was thinking, I prefer like Middle Eastern food. My dad's Armenian from Syria, and I was thinking like I love like a good full breakfast. But for Armenian, there was a soup, and I don't know what it's called, but it was like a yogurt lemon soup with herbs in it that my grandmother used to make. It was just absolutely delicious. And I wish I could make a vegan version of that now. So yeah,
Well,
that's my answer.
it was a lemon madzoon soup.
Yeah, it was
That's
warm, but it was like a yogurt and herbs, a lot of fresh herbs and lemon and yogurt, and it was so good.
That sounds amazing.
It's almost like the Greek evgol. I can't even say it, but it's like the Greek soup. But yeah.
Maybe somebody will leave a comment on this video on YouTube and I'll finally have my answer. Thank you so much for joining me today and for being so open and genuine and down to earth and really full of love. That really came through. Your love and your care of people and what your faith is based in really came across, and I appreciate you.
It was a joy to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
If you'd like to find out more about our guests or about any of the resources, please visit amotche.com. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Amot Che. If this episode resonated with you, please visit amotche.com for resources, support, and ways to get involved. Share this episode to help break the stigma and build community. Take care of yourself and each other.